Characters represent the 7 deadly sins, and this realization is crazy. Now, I'm gonna start off with the most obvious one, Mary, and that is lust. The amount of heinous and down bad. Welcome back. Today, I'm gonna talk about how the sinner's characters represent the 7 deadly sins, and this realization is crazy. Now, I'm gonna start off with the most obvious one, Mary, and that is lust. The amount of heinous and down bad lines they gave this chick are absolutely insane. And her seduction of Stack is what led to his downfall. And next up, we got Stack, who definitely represents pride. I think this one's obvious too, the way he carries himself, the way he corrects when he gets called boy. And I've seen it pointed out, another thing with him and Mary is that since she's white passing, he feels proud that he's able to bang.
Many people watched Sinners and probably thought this is just a vampire movie. Put a little music added to it. It's so much to unpack, I'm gonna have to do this in 2 parts. If you have not seen the movie, this is your chance to scroll now. We talking about I ruined it for you. Like I said, Sinners was the whole spiritual download wrapped in a ritual. We're gonna start at the juke joint with the twin brothers smoking Stag. He came back to Mississippi in a Jim Crow. Here it rise. Why? Because
Okay, so real hoodoo priestess were actually on the set of the movie Sinners.
Now, the reason why you probably felt like praying in the middle of this movie is because they got real life hoodoo spells in it.
And former slave rituals that he was borrowing from when he sort of like crafted the mythology of your character. Hoodoo is a real practice, and we had a hoodoo consultant, and I spoke to hoodoo priestesses. So it is very much grounded and real and practiced. And
Now, I told y'all a little minute ago that these scary movies, real life be having spiritual shit attached to them. This is why during this scene when she started doing the ritual, I felt like in my spirit that I needed to pray. And then come to find out, she actually talking to the people who actually doing this. Cause I'll be damned if you actually saying something that I don't know and something trying to come through the screen. And it's like the more that I research on this movie, the creepier it get.
And this Theodore Royce told Crowley that he had given away the greatest secret in occult history. And you're about to learn what this secret is. I had realized that the most efficient way, the most powerful way to acquire occult knowledge was in fact to become a witch. I might seem a pretty broad jump from being a candidate for the ministry to becoming a witch, but that's what I did. And so by the time I got out of college, I had written The King of the Witches, Alex Sanders, over in London, and he had directed me to a coven that was in Plymouth, Massachusetts. By the time I got out of college, I went out and I took a leave of absence from my seminary duties, and I went and taught high school for a couple of years and met my wife. She also had a profound interest in witchcraft and the occult, had been studying it for some time, and so we ended up getting together. And we found that there was a fellow who was the Grand Master Druid of all North America down in Arkansas. He lived in a little tiny, he lived out in the country near a little tiny town called Hattieville, Arkansas. And from there, he ran a huge network of druids all over the United States. And he saw some promise, quote unquote, in my wife and I, and offered us to come down and study directly under him to become high priest and high priestess of the druids. So that's what we did. We went down, spent 3 months in the summertime studying under this man and learning all the mysteries of the 5 points of the pentagram, all the mysteries of hermetics and mental magic and natural medicine and all sorts of stuff. That we'd sit on a park bench, or a picnic table rather, under the stars every night, and we would learn about these occult mysteries. We got ordained as high priest and high priestess, and we were married for time and all eternity by a witch hand fasting in Zion State Park over in Zion, Illinois, which is just north of Chicago, in a magic circle with 200 witches standing around us, a huge circle with all of them dressed in black and a big bonfire in the center. And after that, we went out on our way to spread the gospel of witchcraft. However, a funny thing began to happen. We went from city to city. We finally found that the best place to be was in Milwaukee, because there we had 90 students in advance lined up who wanted to learn witchcraft. This was in the mid-70s. And so what happened was we settled there and we began to set up regular classes and covens. Before we knew it, though, new things began to come on the horizon. Both some of my friends who were witches, in fact, the guy who owned the occult bookstore in town, and also some of my spirit guides, because I was also a trance medium, or what today would call a channeler. I'd been ordained as a spiritualist minister and trained in that, began to tell us that if we really wanted to understand the deep parts of witchcraft, we need to get involved in Satanism. We need to read the Satanic Bible. And so I bought a copy and looked that over, and it was very, very interesting. I agreed with much of it, which would have astonished me just a few years earlier when I'd begun my occult studies. And see, this is how Satan does things. He gradually introduces you to ever more and more bizarre doctrines until all of a sudden you're overwhelmed. Well, I joined the Church of Satan, and soon after that, I ended up getting the 2nd degree in the Church of Satan, which is called Warlock. This is the certificate, excuse me, that you will see. This is also in a couple of my books. It's reproduced. You'll notice down at the bottom here, I even got Anton LaVey's autograph. Isn't that wonderful? Anyway, I want to just point out a couple of things here. Notice that it says the Church of Satan having, passed before the Council of Nine, Order of the Trapezoid. Now, remember that. That's going to be significant later. Also, I should explain that I had legally changed my name because Christopher Pendragon's sin was much more numerologically powerful than William Sneblin. Plus, it sounded a lot more dramatic, don't you think? I was a Reverend Dr. Sin. Isn't that this other character on a TV show or a soap opera or something? Anyway, so we began to work in Satanism, and I learned that Anton LaVey, and this may astonish some of you, but Anton LaVey's brand of Satanism is like kid stuff. It's entry-level Satanism, so to speak, because it's used primarily to draw people into the darker stuff. And it's very evil, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's not like it's a Sunday school picnic or anything, but compared to the real serious Satanism, it's totally harmless, relatively speaking. In order to get into that, though, there was something very important I had to do. I had to become a Freemason, because you can't get involved in Satanism on the hardcore level without first being a Freemason. And so I found someone, I was sponsored into the Masons, and I became a 1st, 2nd, 3rd degree Mason. I went through the York Rite. I went through the Shrine. In fact, this is my little shrine portrait here. As you can see, this is just kind of by way of documentation that I really was involved in these things. That was my official shrine portrait, which they took as part of my initiation. And then soon after that, I went through the Scottish Rite as well. So I basically covered all the branches of Masonry that there are to do. And then I went even beyond that. But this is my certificate as a sublime prince of the royal secret. That's the title, 32nd degree Mason. See, Masons love big sounding titles. I mean, they just think that's the greatest thing. They have titles like perfect master, most perfect master, perfect excellent master. Like these people have a self-esteem problem, right? So once I went through all of that, I was worthy. I was ready to become involved in hardcore Satanism. What did that mean? Well, that meant I had to sell my soul to the devil. It's important to understand that the price involves a kind of spiritual and sexual pyramid scheme of immense power, and I'm going to explain that. Most all of us, I think all of us, in fact, have seen this because it's on the back of our dollar bill. This is the back of the Great Seal of the United States. And I doubt if it's news to many of you that this is also a highly constructed occult Masonic symbol. You've got here, Annuit Shaped Novus Ordo Seclorum. This year begins the New World Order. So when you hear people talking about the New World Order, that's not a new thing. This term has been around for at least a couple, 3 centuries, if not before that. And then you'll notice here, the Roman numerals. 1776. Now everybody thinks, oh, isn't that wonderful? That's when the Declaration of Independence was signed. Yeah, but that wasn't when America was founded. America didn't really officially start as the United States until the Articles of Confederation were signed. And as a result, let's look at something else that began on May 1st, 1776. That's a high Satanic holiday called Beltane. And that is the beginning of the Illuminati. That is what was started, a new world order in 1776. Now, notice here there's 13 ranks in this pyramid. And I'm going to talk to you about what that means. Now, I'm going to kind of crack this code. It's important to understand that like any occultic symbol, This has multi-layers of meaning, and what I'm showing you today is not the only way to decode it, but it's the relevant way for our purposes this evening. This is how you break that down. If you'll notice, the lower levels here are the well-known U.S. Masonic degrees. They form the foundation of the pyramid. And then beyond that, you have, for example, the Order of the Trapezoid. That's the beginning order of Satanism. Then you have the Ancient and Primitive Rite of Memphis and Mizraim. That's the 97 degrees. Then you have the Ordo Templi Orientis. That's Crowley's brand of sexual masonry. Then you have the Palladium. The Palladium is where you have to marry a demon or a fallen angel. Then you have the Illuminati. I got 1 degree into that, and then the Lord pulled me out of it, praise God. Above them are the 9 unknown men. These are men, sorry, no women, ladies. These are men who are extremely super high-level occult masters who are selected, each one of them, to reign over a continent. These men, in return, report to a group that's called the Seven. And these 7 are very, very powerful fallen angels. They're what the Bible calls principalities. And they, in turn, report to the great architect of the universe, Lucifer himself. His title in Hebrew is I Am Sof Or, which translates as the light of limitless nothingness. In other words, Lucifer is a big 0. And this is the hierarchy in basic form. I mean, you could break this down in other ways, but what I want you to understand is it's a giant spiritual, financial, and sexual pyramid scheme. What do I mean by that? Well, all this stuff costs money. And I think you all understand how a pyramid scheme works. You get a lot of people on the bottom to give a little bit of money, and the people on the top get rich. And then they run off with the money into the Cayman Islands or something. That's why this is illegal. But what happens here is you've got all these people, like, for example, when I went through the Blue Lodge, it cost me about $150 worth to get degrees. Now, that was in the 70s. It's probably twice that today. And I had to pay $150 for the Scottish Rite. I think I had to pay $130 for the York Rite. I had to pay another $150 for the Shrine, plus annual dues for all of these things. Now, in addition, there's dues for all these things up here. And all this stuff adds up. These people are getting very, very wealthy. And if you don't believe me, look at the Shrine Temple in your community. That thing is incredibly, incredibly ornate. So there's a tremendous amount of money being filtered upward by this. Now, additionally, there's a tremendous amount of energy. Think about this. There's all these rituals going on all over the world. Like in my personal case, when I was involved in this stuff, I was going to rituals 4 nights a week. And Satan is up at the top of this pyramid receiving all of this as worship, even though it's boring. I mean, you know, I'll tell you, it is more interesting to watch an ice cube melt than it is to sit through most Masonic meetings. And if any of you are former Masons, you can probably give me a hearty amen to that. And Satan loves this because he's an egomaniac. He wants to be like God. He wants to receive our worship. And that's what he does with all these rituals. But there's also a profoundly sinister aspect of this, which I must get into. And I apologize in advance because some of this is going to be kind of gross. But we have to talk about the royal secret of Masonry and how that fits into this spiritual pyramid scheme. I've talked about this guy by name, and I don't think I've bothered to formally introduce him. Isn't he a cutie? This is Edward Alexander Crowley, also known as Aleister Crowley. He styled himself the wickedest man in the world. He believed himself to be the great beast, and he changed his name to Aleister Crowley, so it would add up in both English, Hebrew, and Greek Kabbalah as 666. In 1904, Crowley had a communication with an extraterrestrial being named Iwas. And this being, through his wife, kind of a channeling type operation, brought forth a book that was called the Book of the Law in 1904. And this book declared that the slain and risen God, i.e. Jesus, had stepped off the throne, and that a new God, the crowned and conquering child, was taking his place. And as a result of this, Crowley proclaimed the end of Christianity and the start of Crowleyanity. Obviously, the guy had no self-esteem problems. In fact, he was a brilliant genius. He could play 8 chess games blindfolded. He was an accomplished poet, mountaineer, painter, writer. He had so many Masonic degrees that you could fill up 5 pages of a book with them. This guy was probably the most highly honored Mason in the world. And he was also the most dangerous man of the 20th century. And he began doing rituals to bring forth this crowned and conquering child. And he began to start what he called the cult of the fascinating child. And in doing this, he uncovered, without knowing it, the royal secret of Masonry. And what happened was, a gentleman came knocking at his door after he published a book. And in this book, it was a book of poetry. And in the book, he had made an allusion to something. And this guy, his name was Theodore Royce. He was a German occultist and the head of the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, which stands for the Order of Eastern Templars. There's the Knights Templar again. And this Theodore Royce told Crowley that he had given away the greatest secret in occult history. And Crowley said, "What do you mean? I don't even understand it." So the guy promptly initiated him on the spot to the 9th degree of the OTO and then explained the secret to him. And you're about to learn what this secret is. The secret is that as a Mason, you are promised immortality. If you go to a Masonic funeral, you will hear them discuss the immortality issue. You will hear them promise that they will go to the celestial lodge above and live there forever. How do they get this immortality? They don't believe in Jesus. The name of Jesus is not allowed to be mentioned in the Blue Lodge of Freemasonry. Where do they get their promise of immortality? Simply, the secret that Crowley uncovered, probably through demonic intervention, is the secret that this immortality is conveyed through tantric sex magic. And the kind of sex magic that we're talking about here, unfortunately, Crowley taught that the way you could live forever was by vampirizing, and he personally bragged 1 year. This is why he was called the wickedest man in the world. And this, I apologize that this is so horrible, but Masons are doing this. Not all Masons, please understand me. Probably 1 in 100 knows about this. But this is a significant enough problem that I feel compelled to share it with you. In our ministry, with one accord, we have had to pray for literally hundreds of people who are the relatives of Masons, either children, grandchildren, nephews, nieces, whatever, and they have been by their Masonic relatives, often in Masonic temples. This is why the Masons believe that they will live forever. They think every time they steal some of that child's youth. And if you notice, children abused do age more rapidly because their innocence has been stolen. What happens then is they believe that they are accessing alternate universes, alternate realities where they can become as gods. Now, the final thing I have to share about this, and then we're going to be closing, is the meaning of this. And this is a very mysterious symbol, which, you know, you've heard all sorts of explanations for it, but I'm going to give you the Masonic Illuminati inner meaning of what this means tonight. And it's going to probably gross you out and astonish you, and I apologize in advance for that. But this is what it means. Crowley reveals the secret behind the all-seeing eye symbol in one of his books, the Book of Thoth, which is a very advanced manual on tarot card readings. And this is the eye of Lucifer. But believe it or not, it corresponds to a human organ that, for lack of a more delicate term, we'll call the rectum. And which is kind of ironic when you think about it, that this represents Lucifer. And what this refers to is that the occult archaeometric doctrine of Masonry is that by accessing alternate universes through sodomy, especially, you can access alternate dimensions of reality through what are called the tunnels of Typhon. Now, you remember I showed you earlier a map of the tree of life. Well, everything in magic, like everything in the occult, has its yin and yang. It's positive and it's negative, it's good and evil. There's always this dynamism. And so therefore, just like there is a tree of life, there is also a tree of evil. This is called the Qlīphot in Hebrew, which translated means harlots. And you'll notice here that all of the names are all evil. And these Typhonian tunnels are the paths between these 10 evil worlds. Now, if you want a little bit more on this than I have time to get into right now, you can read the book Lucifer Dethroned, because it does go into it. But here is what is ultimately involved. There is a belief that through this sexual perversion, they can access these tunnels into alternate universes, alternate realities. And the goal of this kind of magic is to find your own universe and become the god over that universe. This buys into the modern day physics theory that there's many, many dimensions of reality. Maybe you've read about that. Alternate universes. It shows up in science fiction a lot. And then once you're the god of this universe, you can start sucking the energy out of it. And you can use that energy through this child to live forever and ever and ever. And there are men, I have met several, that claim to be hundreds of years old. Now, of course, are they lying their lips off? I frankly think they are. This is a deception. Satan is deceiving these people to draw them into all kinds of profound evil. But the important point is not, does this really work? The important point is, do these people believe it? And sadly, they do. And this broad genre of magic is called, and here's a nice big word for you, Transuguthian magic. And all that means is it's magic that goes into trans-Plutonian space. Space beyond the planet Pluto, which they believe is beyond the pale of the sun and therefore beyond the pale of the Judeo-Christian God. They believe there are gods out beyond Pluto that are far more powerful and far more dangerous and far more deadly than either God or the devil. And that's what these beings, these men, are trying to access.
My problem with urination finally stopped, and what I did was ridiculous. All I needed was one tomato cut in half.
This is a very important symbol in Masonry and in Satanism. It's called a trapezoid. Doesn't it bother you a little? Doesn't it look unfinished somehow? That's the idea. In architecture, this is called a frustrum because it frustrates people. And this is believed by Masons who understand this stuff to be the ideal shape for manifesting demons. That's why Masonic altars are all built in a trapezoidal shape. Now here's the deal. You put this on top of this, and you've got the thing that's back on the dollar bill. But notice something. Let's go back to the original symbol. Why is this incomplete? What does that mean? Nothing in this thing is there by accident. Nothing in this symbol is there by accident. This is incomplete because the capstone is missing. What did Jesus Christ say in Matthew 21? He says, "Did you never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner?" Now I ask you, what is the head? What stone can be a headstone and a cornerstone at the same time? The top of a pyramid. And Jesus Christ is the capstone of this pyramid because it is an expression ultimately of the Trinity. That's why this is in the way. Satan thinks by putting his little idol here, he can keep Jesus Christ from descending to the earth and assuming his rightful place as the top of the pyramid. And that's what this symbol is, and that's why Satan is so desperate to keep this as his symbol, is because he does not want this pyramid completed. But we know that no matter what Satan does, it is going to be completed because nothing can stay the hand of God.
Did you know there was a vampire in the Bible and one of the most influential media personalities in the world is named after her? Orpah, sister of Ruth, and Orpah Gail Winfrey, otherwise known as Oprah Winfrey. Orpah in the Bible was kind of killed with a stake. What the Bible doesn't tell you is that she birthed 4 giants, one of them being Goliath, the giant David famously killed. David's general would also put a stake straight through Orpah herself, a spindle if you may. Then we look to the vampire in the Testament of Solomon, who says he is from the constellation of Aquarius, and not only subjugated but also a descendant of the archangel Uriel. Not an archangel getting freaky with humans back then, child. But anyways, Ornias' name could have later turned into the Cabal surname of Onassis, as in Aristotle Onassis. But anyways, Ornias goes on to explain how he has other forms, a hag, or what some people would call a jinn or sleep paralysis. You know, the moment when you wake and you cannot move, cannot talk, and there is something atop you, darker than the night itself. Humanoid, but not quite human. Ornias goes on to say that he's the type of hag that does what he does when men lust after virgin. For those not in the know, whoever the entity Enki appears as in your belief system is who you should try your damnedest to call on when these entities harp themselves upon you. For example, Enki is called Jesus in Christianity, Krishna in Hinduism, and so forth. I'm telling you, it works like a charm, honey. We'll dive into more of that later, but Ornias the vampire has another form, a winged creature. He uses this version of himself to ascend to the heavens. Perhaps a bat, perhaps something entirely different. And lastly, he can transform into a lion. Etymologists say the word vampire goes back to Slavic times where they said upar, or as if upar, U-P-I-R. Excuse me if I pronounce it incorrectly. Upar, Orpa, Oprah, whatever. But Orpa means back of the neck. You know the place where vampires bite in Pulp Fiction? Yeah, that. And they claim it is because Orpah turned her back on her mother-in-law Naomi after not only Orpah's husband died, but also her brother-in-law and father-in-law, and there were no more men left around in the family for her to marry, as was custom back then. Naomi told her and Ruth to leave and go back to their homeland, as was tradition, and Orpah listened, while Ruth chose not to. So why did translating scholars name Harafa Orpah? So cruel. And out of all names, why would Oprah Winfrey's parents name her after a minor biblical figure who is often viewed negatively? All I know is that Aristotle Onassis and Oprah Winfrey are both Aquariuses. One is an economic vampire and the other is probably an energy vampire and possibly a bloodthirsty one at that. All jokes aside though, seriously, let's do a deep dive talk about some facts and deconstruct vampires.
I'll say it once and I'll say it again. Vampires portrayed in Hollywood film are demons. One thing that's a rule of thumb in regards to vampire lore is the fact that vampires cannot enter into your home without an invitation. The same thing actually happens in regards to how sin works and how demons work and how they would enter your life. Technically, demons have no dominion in being able to enter into your being or into your life unless you actually give it spiritual authority or you come into agreement with it. Just a heads up, there's going to be spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen it, then you may want to keep scrolling. Y'all remember that scene when Cornbread came back from urinating and then he was basically like, all right, y'all are gonna let me in? And they were kind of confused. And so Annie was saying like, you've been coming in and out of here all day. Why do you need us to get bite him? So then obviously finding out that Cornbread is a vampire and they're dealing with things that are far more sinister.
You, because your character, Annie, I just feel like I don't know, the way that she's the healer of the group. Could you talk a little bit about exactly what he told you as far as like what, sort of like indigenous and African and, former slave rituals that he was borrowing from when he sort of like crafted the mythology of your character?
Hoodoo is a real practice, and we had a hoodoo consultant, and I spoke to hoodoo priestesses, so it is very much grounded and real and practiced, and I think he's really treated it with as much respect and honor as possible, because I do feel like the Western world media has kind of shown us like a really dark side of voodoo, and I didn't know it was such a healing, loving, spiritual, connected practice.
So it sounds like to me that they are trying to give a different light.
Okay,
Voodoo and hoodoo are two different things. Voodoo is a religion, hoodoo is a practice. And I challenge you to actually put your prejudices aside and do some research on the origins of hoodoo, to do some research on the origins of your ancestors and what they believed in.
Hoodoo is a real practice, and we.
Who's that man? You twins? Nah, we cousins.
There are legends of people with the gift of making music so true. You can conjure spirits from the past and the future. This gift can bring fame and fortune, but it also can pierce the veil between life and death. We gonna kill every last one of you.
Let me in, man. Some weird shit going on out here.
Until it's time for you to get the hell up off the planet at the end time. But you gotta have a certain amount of knowledge to do that. But that person who went to that doggone light don't necessarily mean that the motherfucker did anything wrong. The light is the astral light, which is the demiurge. The origins of evil in Hindu mythology.
I ain't mean to scare you. Thought y'all forgot about me in here.
You Love Sinners, a book that carries the same energy that I've been recommending for the last 2 years here on TikTok. It is Ring Shot. I recommend this book every Halloween season. I'm gonna give y'all a quick rundown without giving any spoilers. So the book is set in Macon, Georgia in 1922 in an alternative history. You know, prohibition and the KKK marches are happening on a regular. You know, and in that time, you know, white people being white people. This is what you need to know before going into this book. Before the beginning of this story, which you'll find out if you read it later in the story, the second Klan came into power on a day they called D-Day or Devil's Night, when this old nasty ass witch summoned these things called Ku Kluxes on Stone Mountain in Atlanta. And despite the first generation of enslaved people disbanding the first generation of Klans people, the witch who summoned these things called Ku Kluxes summoned a specific demon that feeds on hate. And since these hate-based demons need hosts and things to possess, what better than the Klan? And when their ideologies began to fall, the release of the movie The Birth of a Nation swayed a lot of white people into believing in the Klan. And in this narrative, The Birth of a Nation came out due to dark magic, so it swayed and empowered the demon. And just like in real life, the movie made a lot of people see the Klan as savior, black people as savage, murderous animals, when it was the opposite way around. So now in present day, 1922, a group of women come together and they hunt these Ku Kluxes, aka they're demon slayers. And the reason why they fight them, because a lot of them are gifted with sight, so they can see the true form of these people beyond the mask. And when the girls aren't fighting, they operate a business. I think it's called Mama's Water. And their leader is a Gullah woman. And within this novel, you'll see a lot of hoodoo and African traditional religion, Christianity, and all that stuff. It's a really good book, and it's a short.
Did this guy right here sell his soul to become a world famous musician to the devil? And now he's the inspiration for Ryan Coogler's and Michael B. Jordan Sinners? Let's talk about it. Alrighty, so this guy right here, Robert Johnson, was born in Hazelhurst, Mississippi to Julia and Noah Johnson. And around age 8 is where he started to develop his musical taste and also his talents. Okay, now fast forward some years down the road. He's now in his early 20s and he's traveling from town to town to Mississippi, Arkansas, even Dallas. And this is how his legend slowly started to spread. Going town to town, performing at corners, performing on random streets, performing in venues is where his legend started to grow as the guy who sold his soul at some crossroads for talent from the supernatural. Somewhere in Mississippi, by a plantation, Robert Johnson went to the local or closest crossroads and he was told to bury his guitar at midnight. And a large shadowy being, which turns out to be the devil took the guitar from him, played a few notes and songs, tuned it to his liking, and gave it back to him. And from that moment on, this where he got his power, so says the legend. But in exchange for this power that the devil gave him after tuning his guitar, the devil in exchange wanted his soul. So there is where he signed the contract, allegedly, to the devil for fame and talent. After that, allegedly, he didn't live any much longer. He ended up dying around the age of 27 for unknown reasons. It's rumored that he probably died from syphilis, or he probably was poisoned because people saw him at a local bar arguing with some people. So they think it could be that as well too. Or some people might say the devil came to collect what was owed to him. So guys, that's pretty much is the quick sum up of Robert Johnson, aka the guy who sold his soul for talent.